Right, I'm going to talk about beginnings, and I'm going to go right back to the beginning of the Bible. In the very first verse, book of Genesis, in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. So what happens in the book of Genesis is that God takes a formless void, darkness covering the face of the deep, and from that formless void he creates the universe. The interesting question to ask is, what was the beginning like? What is the nature of this beginning? Of course, modern science, cosmology, tries to go back to the very, very beginnings of the universe, and the CERN experiment is trying to do just that at the moment, and we're now milliseconds after the supposed Big Bang. But the interesting thing about theology's notion of the beginning is that theology suggests that in the beginning there was nothing, absolutely nothing. And in fact, that's not what's implied in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis implies that in the beginning the earth was formless and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. That there was this formless nothingness and darkness and something that was deep. And how are we to interpret that? What does that mean? Well, for the ancient Greeks, what that meant was that there was lots and lots of random stuff. There was material stuff, and just as a potter works on clay to form it into a pot or a bowl or whatever, so the creator works on this formless stuff and moulds it into something else. Christian theologians and Jewish theologians and Muslim theologians came along and said, we don't really want to think about creation in quite that way, because the problem is that when you talk about the creator moulding stuff that's already there, in some sense that's constraining what he can do with it. It limits him. So I'm quite constrained, if I'm working with clay, with what I can do with it. I can't make a knife out of clay, or at least it wouldn't be a very good knife, but I can make a pot. So I can make this, but not that. Now, the Big Bang actually suggests that the beginning of the universe, the origin of the universe, was a physical process. It was this turning into that. So some physicists have talked about the Big Bang coming as a fluctuation in a quantum vacuum. That was quite a popular notion a few years ago. But a vacuum, believe it or not, is not nothing. But when Jewish, Christian and Islamic theologians talk about nothing, they don't even mean a vacuum. They mean nothing, nothing at all. You can't say anything about it. And from that utter nothingness comes the creation of the universe. And that is the beginning, if you like. Now, what science does is it talks about one thing becoming another. It talks about a natural process. X becomes Y, a fluctuating quantum vacuum becomes the Big Bang, which becomes the universe. But theologically, when we're talking about creation, we're not talking about one thing becoming another. We're not talking about a natural process that can be defined and investigated in scientific terms. So when we read this verse, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, the way that that's been interpreted is that in the beginning, out of nothing, complete nothingness, God creates the heavens and the earth. But that's, as a notion, out of nothingness. It's quite hard to find that verbatim in the Bible, and you certainly don't really find it in Greek ancient philosophy. It's a very new thought, but it's a very fundamental thought that's shared by Christianity, Judaism and Islam in the ancient world and indeed today.
You do a bit of research into this area. I know this is an area of interest to you. When you're trying to formulate ideas and knowledge about this very tricky subject, what do you use as your source material?
Well, we work with the tradition of thought. So we look back in history and we say, well, what have people said about this and why? And which ideas have lasted and why? And what we find is that, for example, creation out of nothing, creation ex nihilo, as the tradition has it, out of nothing, is an idea that was formed pre-modern science, but actually it's an idea that was put together for philosophical and theological reasons, not for scientific reasons. So we can still work with it. And so we're working with the tradition, we're looking at why this has been taught, why it's lasted over time, why the idea hasn't really been debunked. And then we're using philosophical tools of thought, we're using tools of logic, we're looking at other aspects of religious tradition and teaching. So it's not something that we can go out and, as it were, test by poking things and measuring things. If we talk about God creating the universe as if it were just like a process within the universe, then it can't really help us to explain how the universe is created, because it just becomes another event within the universe.
Scientists do poke things and measure things.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent do their discoveries and growing body of knowledge peck away at or move your frontiers of philosophy and theology?
What we do is we try and work out what science does, what its field of inquiry is, and why we do it, and what theology does and philosophy does, and why, and distinguish the one from the other. And in that way, we better understand the nature of the discipline of science and what it can and can't do and what it can and can't explain. So, for example, the business of science deals with natural processes. It deals with processes within the universe. So it interprets one part of the universe in terms of other parts of the universe. So this theory about thermodynamics interprets this theory about quantum mechanics, which interpret, and so on and so forth. So it refers to things within the universe, and it explains those processes, it predicts them with enormous power, and it enables us to manipulate the natural world to great effect. But what the Christian doctrine of creation is trying to do is not explain so much things within the universe, but explain the universe itself.
When I put this on YouTube, are you going to read the comments?
Sure, that would be fascinating, I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I read an awful lot of stuff from, goodness me. So we've got a book here by a philosopher called Thomas Nagel called The Structure of Science. We've got a book here called about scientific essentialism, about the nature of science. We've got a book here by a Canadian philosopher of mind called Evan Thompson, called Mind in Life, Biology, Phenomenology and the Sciences of Mind, about the nature of mind, which is a very, very superb book, it really is. An awful lot of Aristotelian philosophy, a lot of Plato, a lot of Kant, books about creationism and its critics in antiquity, all kinds of, you name it, I try and do it. Fail dismally, I'm sure, but these are the kinds of very, very big overarching questions that we deal with about how we interpret the nature of creation and where it all came from, and fundamentally what it means. I think that's what we're particularly interested in, is what it means.